the fact of the matter is to realize that this illness that this country experiences is not color based. Because I looked at it, you know, with my cousin Robert's experience. I looked at there was a group of white men that was trying to kill him. But it was a white man that saved him.
Hmm.
Okay, and who brought him up there, and that so that's when you begin to look at the illnesses of this country is not color based, it's more class based,
Right.
huh? And and the people, the haves are playing divide and conquer with the have nots, huh? And just like even with the with the and just
So first things first, just thank you for taking time out of your day to allow me to interview you. Just state your name for me, please.
my name is Will Jacobs, and first of all, I'd like to say I appreciate the opportunity. It was a blessing.
Man. And the reason you're here today is because I was at a work gathering. I heard you speaking, and to be completely honest, I wasn't there to socialize too much. I was just worried about when the food was gonna be done, right? And so, once I guess quenched my appetite, I'm sitting there listening. I'm like, okay, he's saying some things, and one of the things that stood out to me were when you were speaking about the Montgomery bus boycott.
Hmm.
He mentioned the precursors to Rosa Parks,
Right.
and I think you're the second person who I ever heard actually mention that before. And so I'm thinking, okay, let me listen to what he has to say, and then from then on, it was just gem after gem. And so I definitely wanted to get you here today to do this interview.
Okay, appreciate it.
And first question, we just gonna jump right into it,
Okay.
is how did you obtain this knowledge? Do a quick summary of how you came to know so much about Black history, and then how this formed your thoughts and opinions about the state of the Black community today.
Well, when we were growing up, uh, when it was dealing with kids, there was a different approach than today because, I grew up in an era where kids were made to be seen and not heard. And so we got to sit around and hear a lot, and it was passed down to us because, we were present uh, when all these activities were going on. We until we actually got older did I really begin to appreciate what I was being exposed to. And, it was just living history. And because again, you just you were present to all these conversations, to even at night. I remember we would sit on the steps there. We're living in Jackson Heights, and the steps would go up, and you had two apartments downstairs, two upstairs, and to get to the upstairs apartments, you had to go up the stairs. Then there was a platform, then you go down the stairs. Well, we would sit there on the steps, and then we would just be quiet to the point we would just gradually edge up the steps until then you forgot we were there. And that's when you got to hear all the good stuff and everything else. And so again, it was just because at that time the community was not as dispersed as it is now. And so, I mean, all the teachers, the doctors, and everybody, live right there. So we all shared those experiences as a community rather than today being as dispersed as we are. People sharing, experiencing individually. Right? And when you and then you go out and someone will have one of those Jim Crow experiences, and of course you come back home and it becomes the talk of the community. You weren't reading about it; you were hearing it in real time. Hmm?
Okay. And around this time, well, first let me ask you this: where were you raised? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama.
Montgomery, Alabama. Okay, so you were right there.
Yeah.
And at this point in time, when you were sitting on the steps, easing your way up, how old were you?
Gosh, we started out 4, 5, 6 years old. We were young because remember the bombing there, the bus boycott was in the mid 50s.
Mhm.
I was born in 1950, and the bus boycott was in 55. So I was basically 5 years old at the time.
And what's one of those conversations that you remember hearing amongst the adults when you were a kid that stands out in your mind as you're sitting on those steps or you're eavesdropping, trying to get all the information.
Oh my gosh, there were just so many. Uh, the one thing that really stands out is not so much as a conversation, but an experience. We had my cousin James and Robert, who lived down in Lowndes County, and Robert uh, came to live with us, and his experience was because there was a group of people, basically the Klan, was meeting at one of the corner stores, and one of them slipped away and came and told my aunt that they're coming for your boys later. And
One of the Klansmen slipped away and said that?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And so what happened was, so later on that night, one day there was a little convoy coming up, and the dogs bark, and so, but they convinced my aunt to call them out of hiding because they knew why they were coming, and so they told my aunt, saying, "Oh, we just want to talk to them. We don't want to hurt." And so they had me put on their shoes. You're familiar with cuckabugs, the little briar that grows on the ground, little briar patches, little sticker bugs.
Hmm.
They grow out in a vine,
Yeah.
but they're ground huggers. So what they did, they had James and Robert to go out, and when they put them in, and what they did, they took them into the middle of the cuckabug patch where they had cleared out the cuckabugs and everything. So they had them to take their shoes off. Then they proceeded to beat James, and Robert's sitting there like, "Oh God, they're going to kill us." So he took off running through the Cuckabug Patch and ran out on Highway 80, which was the Selma to Montgomery Highway. And so he ran in front of this car. This old white man was driving it. And he said, "They're going to be waiting down the road for you." And he said, "Get in the trunk." And so Robert obediently got in the trunk. Sure enough, before they could get into Montgomery County, the Klan had set up a roadblock and asked the white man. The white man said, "Have you seen an end?" White man said, "No, I ain't seen nobody." Right? So they just waved him on through, no reason to suspect him. So they brought him up to where we lived in Jackson Heights, Veterans Court at the time. And since my mother had basically grown up in New Orleans and didn't have no longer had that direct family link to the folks in the country, they brought Robert to stay with us because there was only two streets, Regent Circle and Roundtree. So we're sitting in there, and they end up killing James.
Yeah.
Right. And so then a few nights later, the Klan came into the neighborhood, and it was a big shootout. We sitting there, Robert and I lying on the floor and looking at each other like, okay. Then when the shooting stopped and everything, then first thing we said, "Well, who won?" So the front door opens, and of course, members from the community came in outside, as we say, end up winning, and they ran off. But the thing of it is, that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, whatever, they found out that the Klan had staked out uh, Union Train Station, Greyhound Bus Station, Trailway, H&L Green, all the places that blacks use transportation points and everything, looking for Robert and everything. And so the community had to end up collecting money and getting someone who had a car to take the back roads to Birmingham, Alabama,
Hmm.
to ship Robert up to Cleveland, and where we had family. And so it was a few weeks or so before we heard anything. So everybody suspected that, oh hell, uh, somebody tipped off the state troopers because they was part of that little network also. But sure enough, he made it safely. Police couldn't beat it, right. That probably had one of the most impactful impressions on me. Except that my granddad had worked for a Klansman, Red Bell, and he was a hell of a mechanic. But every Friday, the police would pull him over, arrest him, and take his money. So he had to go back to Red Bell and borrow money. And I forgot, I'll never forget the look on my grandfather's face as he had to sit there and look at the cops that had just beat him and took his money, talking to his boss, because the intent was for him to stay in debt until eventually he was able to borrow some money from a mechanic named Harris, a black guy named mechanic Harris, and to pay it off and get away. So those are a lot of things. Is you hear a lot of things, but those were two entrenched experiences. But one thing about it, getting back, but it helped me. The fact of the matter is to realize that this illness that this country experiences is not color based, because I looked at it, with my cousin Robert's experience. I looked at there was a group of white men that was trying to kill him, but it was a white man that saved him.
Hmm.
Okay, and who brought him up here, and that so that's when you begin to look at the illnesses of this country is not color based, it's more class based,
Right.
huh? and and the people, the haves are playing divide and conquer with the have-nots. And
Mhm.
just like even with the with the and just like I said, just experiencing that and being in the thick of that and everything, it's just it was daily life. Even the bus, going to the back of the bus, or you have to go to the window to get your food and everything. It was just a collection of experiences.
Mhm.
But we also uh, recognized that we had what we call friends in court who were not black.
Mhm.
So, you know, so we learn to look at people from the inside rather than being color based.
Right. And so you mentioned too that there was one of the Klansmen slipped away and gave your aunt the heads up.
Exactly.
And then you mentioned the man who helped your cousin get in a truck and drive through the checkpoints.
Right.
So
Put
was
him in the
this
trunk of the
some
car. Exactly.
was this something that was out of the ordinary?
No.
So it was something that you saw pretty often where it's like, okay, I see that, like you said, it isn't a race thing, it's more of a class thing.
Yeah.
Um, and there are some white people who can be identified as allies and they see the injustice in this country.
And that's exactly right. Because even one of my greatest accomplishments in the military was when I was the chairman of the Black History Program down at Keachler Air Force Base, and I had two guest speakers that year. And this is where that was, I passed it on. And what I, was able to, it was a teachable moment because it reminded people it wasn't a black movement; it was a civil rights movement. Okay, and because even if you look at the three young men that was down in Philadelphia, Mississippi, Cheney and those, only one was black. One was a white Christian, the other was a white Jew. And all those white college kids that came down south, and they could just blend into the community. But they put it up, they put everything at risk. When you think about Morris Dees there in Montgomery, who started an organization originally, it was called Klan Watch. He's the one that monitors all these hate groups and everything. Jewish book. Okay. And so and then uh, there was a lot of it. Even when I helped integrate Alexander City Junior College, when Lillian Wallace was governor, I had a young kid, young white boy, to call me one night, and he said, "Hey, Jake, my mom's put me out." And so, because he had been attending some of our rallies and taken some material home, and his mom was cleaning his room and found it and demanded that he dispose of it. He refused, so she kicked him out. So he called me, and so I got in the car and I went and got him. My mom's worked from 11 to 7. And so when she came home the next morning, we were sitting there eating breakfast. So he stayed with us until his brother, who was in the Air Force, sent for him to come out to California where he was. And even some of the beatings of the Freedom Riders and everything, they went for the white folks before they came for us, because this is where they found out, just like if you look at the Edmund Pettus Bridge and everything, because people quickly find out there's something worse than being an N, and that's an N lover. Because you're being perceived as a traitor. And even when you look at what's going on today, it's it's a reinvention of Jim Crow, just like during the Reconstruction and everything else, because what you see, the atmosphere, the political atmosphere that's being created today and everything is, again, someone who's a billionaire taking advantage of people seeing other people of a different color being a threat to them. Okay, when the greatest threat is the people with the money. Just like I tell one young man, oh yeah, got one story when I was at Alexander City, and we'd had some incidents and everything, and because I was a management challenge, but eventually the president, because what happened, there was an incident, whereas a young black female came walking into the class, and she was crying. So I'm sitting there, what happened? So she pointed at this young white man that said he called me a black bee. And I said, who? So she pointed to him. So I got up, walked down, and went over and confronted him, stood there and blocked him in so he couldn't get out of his chair. And I said, she said that you called her a black bee. And he said, what if I did? And I said, well, if you don't apologize, I'm going to beat you right here.
Mhm.
And so he looked at the teacher and she said, oh, I think you should apologize. So he sat there. So he realized he was cornered. So he said, sorry. I said, no, you better say it like you mean it. Okay. And he kept repeating until I was convinced. And I told myself, let me tell you something. If I ever hear of you calling one of our women a black bee again, I said, I'm going to find you. Do what? But so as a result of that incident, because I had graduated every time there was an incident, I finally graduated to the school president. But they asked me, what was a recommended solution. And I said, we need to have dialogue. And but the point being, in that dialogue, there was a young white man, young white student there with us, and he told about his traumatic experience because growing up, he had this black woman that was basically did all the functions of his mother, breastfed him and everything. And when he was about to enter school, she called him in and told him from this day forward, if she don't call you Mr. whatever his name was, to tell us. So for the rest of his life, his experiences with her, I should say, she had to call him Mr. whatever his name was. And he talked about the pain that he carried, having her to do that. When, if he got sick in the middle of the night, his mother went and got this black woman to do it and everything. So that's when that kind of educated me, also, that uh, it's not all color based. Okay. And this is where we have to look at situations based on their merit rather than their color. Yeah. And that's what the movement, because one thing, okay, back to the Black History Program, sorry, I jumped around. I had two guest speakers that year. I had my fraternity brother, I think, Kenny Dollar, who was the director of the opening and closing ceremony for the Olympics. And he was a guest speaker. Then I had this white female, Doris Ridge, who wrote the autobiography of Bessie Coleman, her and her husband to come in. But again, that was a teachable moment because to let people know that many times there were some of these uh, rallies and things that as blacks, we were in a minority in terms of it. And the mixture of it is because it was a civil rights movement and everything. And if we too busy looking at people strictly based upon skin tone as opposed to our common agenda, you're going to end up in a losing position.
Right. And then earlier, I know you mentioned the sense of community. Even in these stories, you hear the sense of community when you say, if you speak to one of our women this way again, when did or when would you say you saw this shift in community where it was becoming more individualistic and separated?
You know, I think that integration has really benefited, but also it has crippled us in terms of how it has affected our family values. Because when we were growing up, you know, you would leave home, you would be it would be impressed upon you. I don't want you to go out there and do anything to F up my name. You know what I'm saying? I remember one of the worst whippings I got one time when I cursed out the neighborhood drunk because he cussed me out. My mama told me, it don't matter. He's grown. Okay. And that was the thing is that uh, because it became when we got away from that do as I say, not as I do, because I'm still responsible for you, and until you deal with the consequences, what I get to make this. You know what I'm saying? But we just kind of we just we just start disrespecting each other on a whole nother level. A whole nother level. That's it. Whereas, like I tell young men like yourself and everything, I say, understand. I tell myself, you know what? My survival depends on you surviving. Huh? So this is why, I am my brother's keeper. Uh-huh. Bottom line. And so that's where everything that I have experienced in life uh, is intended for me to grow it and pass it on, grow from it. And that's, and that's where we lost that real sense of community because, I was growing up, before we would go to the store and buy something, you would see if, you would go to a neighbor and borrow. And nobody kept score or anything like that. If we would borrow water, sugar, salt, whatever the case may be, it was more a sense of community. And
And like you said, with the story with your mom and you getting that one of the worst whoopings you remember is when you cussed out the neighborhood drunk and he told your parents, obviously. Um, Clearly, back then there was some type of separation between the youth in adults,
Absolutely.
as far as the level of respect.
Absolutely.
So keep going to that a little bit more.